Hey guys, it's Matthew. I am not here to do a music video, but I am here to do an AP US History project. Today I'm going to talk about Abraham Lincoln and Martin Luther King Jr., and more importantly, which one did most for African American rights. Now, to begin with, Abraham Lincoln is known as, generally, the one who freed the slaves. He is the one who signed the Emancipation Proclamation and passed the 13th Amendment, which abolished slavery. However, Martin Luther King was one of the main leaders of the Civil Rights Movement, and the Civil Rights Movement led to the passage of the Civil Rights Act and other important legislation, like the Voting Rights Act. Abolition, even before Lincoln's time, had been an important issue. For example, the Quakers were a group that had been against slavery from the beginning of slavery. People were beginning to realize that slavery was not only economically inefficient, but also morally wrong. A lot of people still supported slavery, though, for their own economic and moral reasons. Basically, people were against slavery before Lincoln's time, but until the Civil War, they didn't really gain any momentum.
My lover's got humor.
The period before the Civil War marked an increase of sectional tension between the North and South, and more focus on the actual issue of slavery. Lincoln himself, though not considering himself to be an abolitionist, was seen as a threat by the Southern states, and when he was elected president, they eventually seceded and formed their own nation, the Confederacy. Immediately after the secession of the Southern states, it became clear that Abraham Lincoln's primary goal was not abolition of slavery, but just the preservation of the Union. This is the South, this is the North, this is the Union. He was against slavery as a moral wrong, however, and saw that African Americans did deserve their freedom, but legally he did not make any sort of decision early on in the war. Until the Emancipation Proclamation, which is seen as his great success. Many Americans believe that that is what actually freed the slaves. And they are correct. The Emancipation did free the slaves, but only the Southern slaves as an act of war. It did not outlaw slavery or free the Union slaves, but it was still a huge step in the right direction for abolitionists. More importantly, what Abraham Lincoln passed was the 13th Amendment and subsequent amendments which gave African Americans many more rights than they had ever had before. That is the main argument for whether or not Abraham Lincoln was the one who did the most for African Americans. Moving on to Martin Luther King Jr.
When your legs don't work like they used to before.
After Abraham Lincoln, there have been the disaster of Reconstruction, so they all sort of lost their rights in just, white supremacy and the Ku Klux Klan and lynchings and grandfather clauses and voting taxes and literacy tests, white supremacy. Anyway, sharecropping also diminished what was left of their rights. Basically, what Abraham Lincoln did was kind of eroded by what happened during Reconstruction, and that's why I believe Martin Luther King Jr. was actually the one who did more for African Americans. Even though Abraham Lincoln set the legal basis for African American rights, African Americans didn't really receive those rights until after the Civil Rights Movement, which Martin Luther King was a monumental part of. He led the Freedom Riders in Alabama. He led many other protests, often against violence from white supremacists. Huge, his March on Washington attracted more than 250,000 supporters, and his I Have a Dream speech moved hearts and emphasized the importance of a society based on equality. Out of the Civil Rights Movement, the Civil Rights Act of 1965, and the Voting Acts Right of 1965. Both of those were huge successes, and they both destroyed legal grounds for the denial of African American rights and offered African Americans equal opportunity for employment. Martin Luther King was a symbol for interracial equality. He was inspiring, truly inspiring. When he was assassinated, the whole nation mourned, and in that period of mourning, President Lyndon Johnson passed the Fair Housing Act of 1968. More civil rights legislation to continue Martin Luther King's legacy. Even in death, he helped the cause of African American equality. So to conclude, while Abraham Lincoln's work towards civil rights was groundbreaking and set the stage for Martin Luther King and the Civil Rights Movement, ultimately, without the Civil Rights Movement, which Martin Luther King was an integral part of, African Americans could have waited for another 100 years before receiving the rights that were rightfully theirs. This is why I believe that Martin Luther King did more for African Americans than Abraham Lincoln. Thank you. Yeah, sorry guys, I know I've been using this channel for school projects every once in a while, but, just bear with me because I gotta do them. And Yeah, subscribe for more music stuff. Peace out.
Yeah, yeah, I know you want me. Like a small boat on the ocean. But if you wanna walk away from me, that's fine. But I gotta get you out of my mind. I never thought I'd ever need to be free.
I said I don't make plans. If you want someone who can, then you're not looking for me. You're just looking for another type of man. I'm trying to be the first man in my stuff.
I'm tough, but I need a buffer from the suffering, or I'll suffocate and we'll run out of love. Yeah, maybe I should care more. You're the one that I care for, but of course,
all I really care is you wake up in my arms one last